Hi, and welcome to Deep Dive with Jamie Stein, where we take a deep dive look at all things reality TV, pop culture, and the world at large. I'm an intuitive and an empath, which means I pick up on the thoughts, feelings, and energy percolating in other people and the world around me. I believe there is meaning waiting to be found at every turn if you're willing to see it. So join me as we dismantle everything from trash TV to high spiritual concepts and learn more about ourselves, each other, and how we're all connected.
I'm asking everyone to have an honest conversation about how they actually feel.
And that's fine.
And nobody wants to be honest because everybody's scared.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Deep Dive with Jamie Stein. Happy summer. Moving out of the fourth, and today we're going to dive into this latest season of The Valley. Feels like a long time coming. As per usual, it feels like a bit of a strange season because it's a bit of a strange show, and I know a lot of people have been talking about how dark it feels, again, as it always tends to feel kind of dark. I was really restless in the first half of the season because it just felt like the first batch of episodes were more about rehashing what happened last season with Janet than anything else. And I felt restless. I felt bored. I didn't want to just rehash the previous season. Now I'm much more into it because once again, Dark Side Danny is coming to the forefront, and I feel like we're getting some real-time drama that is recontextualizing for some last season. And I find it, yes, dark, but fascinating from a human behavior perspective. And more than just a human behavior perspective, I'm finding it fascinating from what I would call the group perspective, the perspective of the ensemble and what's happening within the group. In particular, there was a recent episode that we're going to dive into where they're now in Mexico. And a few episodes ago, we're recording this Tuesday, July 7th, I want to say. Yeah. So I believe there's a new episode tonight. We will have not seen that. The last episode was them celebrating Zach's birthday at the club. But a few episodes ago, they were celebrating Schwartz's birthday, and then they go back to the hotel room. And there's this fight that emerges, this kind of almost ensemble-wide fight. Kristen and Luke are not present. Or Luke, I think, actually shows up in the middle. Kristen's not present for it. She's recovering in the refuge of her hotel room. And I was just so drawn to this fight because, again, as per usual with this show, I couldn't really make heads or tails of it. Like what I saw and witnessed was there was a lot of strong energy. There was a lot of strong feelings. There were a lot of strong emotions. There was something urgent moving through the room. But when I tried to track the threads of what they were actually fighting about, it almost felt to me like a moving target. It felt like a whack-a-mole. It felt like they themselves weren't even tethered to a consistent, grounded emotional reality where they knew what they were fighting about. So just as a few examples, it starts off with, Danny comes in, and of course he's drunk or tipsy or whatever we want to call him. And Janet wants to play a game with the group. And curmudgeonly Danny is like, grumbling. He doesn't want to play a game with Janet. And Lala turns to him and basically says, when are you going to forgive her? And then Danny puts a smile on his face and says, I have. And then Lala introduces this topic of, apparently you're liking these really sort of tasteless social media posts about Janet and her husband. And initially Danny's like, no, I haven't done that. But then a few minutes later, he's basically saying, damn right I did. And then you got Janet on the other side of the room initially arguing, you have like these posts and I have these screenshots. And this is just an example of how you can say whatever you want, but if I did the same thing, then I'd be punished for it. So that's sort of what she's arguing at the top of it. But then as the scene evolves, it becomes more about, again, kind of revisiting last year, and I got punished for saying what happened. which to me, I don't know. I mean, maybe we could try to track it to understand the logic of how this went from the screenshots to that, but it felt almost like a related but separate topic. And then meanwhile, you've got Jesse sitting there who in his interviews is poo-pooing Lala for her indiscreet sense of timing and bringing this up at a time where everyone's drunk and tired. But then when it cuts to the scene, he's sitting there adding fuel to the fire by pointing out that Janet has these screenshots that do in fact prove that Danny was liking these posts. But then even that's confusing because Jesse tends to be on Danny's side in all of this and wants everyone to lay off Danny. So I have no clue what his dog is in this fight. And then ultimately you have Zach initially defending the likes with the social media comments saying, we've all done it. What's the big deal? Jasmine starts speaking up about why are you taking Danny's side? And then suddenly Zach's screaming about how everyone's afraid to confront Danny, which would seemingly be in alignment with Jasmine, but he's also directing his anger at Jasmine. The whole thing is just a whirlwind of unfocused, scattered energy. And so for me taking this in, especially because I actually like my training. I'm trained in group facilitation, as is my guest, who I'm going to bring out in a moment. So we work with groups, and I'm always so drawn to the notion of the group field. I mean, we talk about that even this podcast, right? The collective. Humanity is a collective. This nation is a collective. Every collective has its own group field, and there's energy that moves through that field through us as individuals that belongs to us as individuals and as the collective. So when I was watching the scene, I was just so drawn to it from this perspective of like, what are we watching play out here in this group? Like, what is the energy moving through this group? Why is it moving so fast and furious? Why is it so scattered? And what's actually trying to come through these people right now? So that's what I'm so interested in. And I have some initial thoughts, but to my point, no one better to explore this with me than my good friend and colleague and also good friend of the podcast, Piper Sample. Hello, Piper.
Hi, Jamie.
As always, I'm so grateful you're here. So thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.
So yeah, I kind of just want to dive in. I mean, I know where I'm most drawn to in this. I don't even know what I wanted to like name a shape, like, triangle, square, but there's so many of them. I don't even know what that shape would be. But where I'm drawn to in terms of the particular formation of this group, of this ensemble, I'm honestly really drawn to Jasmine, actually. I'm really drawn to Zach. I'm definitely drawn to Danny because it does feel to me like in some ways he's the core of like what everything is organizing around in all of this. And then honorable mention to Janet, honorable mention to Nia. But again, even just in rewatching the scene, I'm so drawn to Jasmine, Zach, and Danny and kind of their points in this, I'll call it a circle, even though it's not a circle. And what's trying to come through around Danny and where these people stand in relationship to Danny and what that's bringing up in them. Maybe that's just my little teaser of kind of where I'm drawn, but I'm curious before I really even say anything else. Where are you drawn, or what have you been noticing, or kind of where are you up top just with this group in this particular moment in time in the show?
That's such a good question. I think, as often happens in the third season of, certain castings or groupings, something starts to happen. And I think one of the things I'm drawn to often in these conversations is also the unseen, the things that aren't being named, which happen to be they're being filmed. They have a relationship now to the way things are produced, the way they're portrayed. There's social media involved in this conversation that is pointing to other people being involved. And so they recognize how they're being seen. by not just their cast members, but by production, by this franchise, by all the people that are responding. And so I think it's fair to bring in that sort of unspoken context to this particular constellation because, you know, it often doesn't get named as something that's trying to move through them. And ultimately, in answer to your question, I think there's something about a lack of trust. And what I hear them sort of trying to figure out is, can I trust myself? Can I trust this group? Can I trust people to be able to discern what is being said through different lenses? Even though they're talking to each other about the things that each other has done, I feel like there's another sort of layer of their history that's showing up in their reactivity to the type of words that are being used, the fact that people are siding with someone and not siding with somebody else, who has each other's backs, that kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the notion of loyalty and blind loyalty tracks its way all through this. And I guess I'm just going to name out loud the way I'm approaching this, because it does feel so scattered and unfocused, is I'm just going to kind of not spitball, but just, follow the threads as they emerge, and let's just see how they all weave together. Because I don't know how else to do this. I don't know how to approach this from an organized place. Because, everyone just seems so all over the place. I mean, I think what I want to name up top, and maybe this is me bringing in what feels like in some ways the energetic nucleus of this. And I notice as I say this, I do actually start to feel feelings, which is, something happened between Danny and Jasmine. And actually, I was surprised to find out about this. I just read about this online because I was doing a little bit of research. Apparently, I think I'm right about what I read. This actually happened before filming of season 1, which I did not realize. I assumed it happened between the first and second season because the second season is when we heard about it. What I read was actually this happened a little bit prior to season 1. But I just want to bring in something happened there where Danny got drunk. And actually, now I'm not even remembering the exact details. I know he grabbed either, I think definitely Melissa and or Jasmine, thigh or rear end. Guys, sorry, I didn't brush up on the details. And, basically said, go get daddy a drink. This happened. And it is interesting because I do notice saying it, I do feel feelings. I start to feel like it's almost like this to me feels, if I had to like place it, like Jasmine's, like I feel upset. And I feel taken aback. And I feel, like trust, you use that word, trust has been, like something has happened here that's disturbing and that has disturbed me. And it kind of came out of nowhere. And I'm hearing the words as Jamie, like naming the unnameable. And so I just want to say, like, that event sits at the nucleus of all this. And then, yes, gathered and organized around that, I think, are the themes that you're bringing in around this is a TV show. There's audience perception. We're being watched, and also loyalty and what that actually means, and blind loyalty. Because what I'm aware of, so I'll just sort of bring this to Zach and Jasmine for a moment. Well, actually, before I do, is there anything you need to say in response to that?
You talked about the, again, the unseen, which I also feel like tangentially has something to do with this trust question. Like there's something that happened with Danny that was unexpected also. I didn't see this or know this about you. I didn't know you had this capacity to behave in this way. And I think something really happened right when that all happened. And so this is kind of when you say the nucleus, I agree. And it feels like it keeps getting returned to, and to Zach's point, without resolution. Something hasn't resolved.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and there's no way to know about this, but I wonder if, and part of me feels so drawn to Jasmine, one, because she was a key player in this. She was the one who was on the receiving end of Danny's behavior. So one, she just plays such a pivotal role. And yet, as we've seen, and this was part of what made Janet so difficult last year, it feels like her story both gets co-opted and used by others. It gets rewritten by others, and also her voice gets shut down a lot. And this season, I see her trying to really bring something in. And even with her, I am confused about where she stands with all of this, which I want to get to in a moment. But I feel so drawn to bring her in because I'm just so, again, if we're talking about this as a group, like if we were facilitating this as a group, Piper, if we were working with the Valley cast for 5 days, from my lips to God's ears. No, I mean, I feel like I would want to start with Jasmine. I feel like I would want to pull Jasmine, I mean, with her permission, into the center of the room and start slowing everything down long enough to give her space to connect with her actual fucking feelings about this. Because it feels to me, I mean, I could be wrong, like even Jasmine is circling around it inside of herself because she may not feel like she has permission to truly know how she feels about it. And this is conjecture on my part, but when you bring in the TV show aspect of it, and if it did actually happen before the first season, I could definitely imagine a scenario where Jasmine's sitting there wondering how to navigate this because, hey, I'm on this show. I have to imagine she's excited about that. I have to imagine this is the payoff of something she's wanted for a while. I don't want to jeopardize my place in the show. I don't want to upset the perceived hierarchy of the show. And of course, just from a systemic level, she's gay, she's a woman of color, and now possibly bringing in, this like, I mean, I don't know how they perceive Danny, but like the words that are coming to me, like one of the kings of the castle, like I'm going to be bringing potentially this hot topic. Like, I don't want to screw this up for me. I don't want to screw this up for other people. Like, I can imagine there, and I am having feelings as I say this, I imagine there's a confusing pressure there. So I just want to say that.
Yeah, I think you're really speaking to something that happens in our culture around what happens when there's an event that is problematic. And there's a response in real time, and then there's a delayed response later, and then there's a demand for a response, and then there's potentially someone else that has had an experience like potentially what actually happened, and then their conflation that comes in as protection, but actually takes over. So yes, I feel like you are talking about something that happened in this specific example that is maybe not just reflected here, but like, what do you call it when it's amplified because of this? This is a bigger thread that happens all the time, everywhere.
Thread meaning the way an event or an experience gets co-opted by different narratives.
Co-opted by different narratives, but also you're speaking to Jasmine's probably initial personal experience. And then even in that, upon reflection, there's a whole bunch of questioning that goes on there, I would imagine, just on her own. Like, right. What do I feel about that? And I love that you want to give her space, or that would be your impulse, because yes, she hasn't really been given that fully. There's been a energy that's sort of, she's also been trying to respond with and to, that doesn't have much to do with the event itself. It's now everybody else coming in here and talking about this.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it's like, one, I could imagine how, to your point, someone going through that experience would minimize it within themselves initially. Because one, first of all, we tend, often to minimize disturbing or uncomfortable things, especially if you like the person, you care, you don't want to acknowledge it to yourself. But then two, everything we're talking about, like the baggage that comes with it. And what I suddenly felt as you were talking was not even just about fear of jeopardizing the show or my position in the show. But when you think about this particular show with this particular group, and you think about personalities like Jax Taylor, like Jesse Lally, like Brittany, like, even Kristen, like, it's like these people come on. I mean, that's why I was drawn to the scene. There was a fast, furious energy moving through that room. Lala wasn't originally a part of it. Now she's a part of it. These are, this is not what I would call a group of people who treat things slowly and with care. This is not a group that thinks first and acts later. This is a group that comes in with a very heavy hand and a lot of groupthink. And again, a lot of blind loyalty. So I can imagine why it might feel, you might want to minimize this rather than not just rocking the boat, but rocking a particularly top heavy boat that could very easily capsize in your direction, if you do or say the wrong thing. And what's also coming to me just as a theme, if I kind of like track everyone as like energy, right? It's almost like I'm experiencing Jasmine as someone who is perhaps more sensitive or someone quieter, certainly feels more on the sidelines than the rest of the group. It's almost like I see her as like a little sproutling trying to sprout. And then there's just this like fucking anvil energy that wants to like drop from the sky and possibly crush her. So I don't know. There's just something there about that kind of energetic quality.
Yeah, there was something that you noted. Let me see if I can feel it again. Oh yeah, this anvil energy that's also like, I hear two things. One is this attitude, I would never do something like that. Therefore, this is bad and wrong. Versus the other voices that are trying to kind of come in this particular scene, which is, we've done that. I've done that. Like, we make mistakes. We do these things. Like, there's this almost like this, like if we were in a room that we facilitate, right? There's the othering that happens or the siding that happens. And so I'm curious about the blind loyalty, the place that someone is standing with something that says, I've done that. I don't want to make you bad and wrong here. Loyalty. What is the loyalty? What are you what are you standing for? What are you standing with here?
Well, especially in instances where we don't even understand what we're fighting about. I mean, like, I was just so aware when that scene ended, the way that scene landed was, it was all about Brittany and Lala, I think, kind of schooling Danny on kind of like the nuances of what it means when you like a social media post. Like, that's what it became about. And I was sort of sitting there watching the scene, just being like, wait, this is what we're talking about? And that loyalty in this, particular scene, like you mentioned, like Zach at one point was like, oh, I've done that. We've all liked things, and it's like, so there's loyalty, but it's also loyalty within a framework where we're arguing about the frame around the picture rather than the picture itself, which I think is interesting. It's like everyone is talking around the unspeakable. And again, I'm aware, again, I'm sort of following different trails through the forest. Okay, I'll come back. There was something that I wanted to bring in before. I'll come back to it. But, it's interesting to me because, so much of that does feel related to Danny. And,
yes.
There's a point with Danny that you can't push beyond. Wait, hold on. Can I just check in with you for a second? Does this feel like the right path to be going down right now?
I'm in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. These episodes are hard. There's just so much.
Yeah.
There's so much. And
there's so much. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, like what I noticed with, sorry, let me just, maybe this is it. Right? This is the group fear of naming the unnameable. Like I'm going towards the heart of the matter, which in my mind, much of it has to do with like, there's just this edge you come up against with Danny.
Yeah.
And I see it in fucking everyone. I see it in Nia. I see it in Zach. There's only so far you can go with challenging him before there's this wire that people are scared to trip. People are scared of him. And, you know, it's just so interesting because I was rewatching certain scenes. It's like Nia is so interesting because, yeah, she's strong. She talks back. She pushes back. She's assertive. She certainly has strength in defending and protecting Danny. And then there's a way in which she'll make it look like she's pushing back against him and challenging him. But like I was watching that scene where they were arguing after the drag show in San Diego. And just noticing how she pushes back, but like she still has, it's kind of like what I was just saying in terms of blind loyalty within a false framework. She has to argue within a false framework. So like just to get very specific, he's like, yeah, I get it. Like I get that, you know, Lala like couldn't handle my playful energy. And, you know, we all saw it. He was not being playful. There was nothing playful about his energy. Nia had to go along with that and be like, yeah, Danny, I forget exactly what she said, but it was something along the lines of like, not everyone gets your playful energy and da, 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 da. And it's like, there it is.
Yeah.
You're kind of colluding with him right here. And then in pushing back against him, he starts accusing her of raising her voice, which she hasn't. And then it's like, she kind of has to go along with that. And then like towards the end of the conversation, he's like, well, I've apologized for what I did. Again, mind you, the apology involved reference to his playful energy being too competitive. Like this is how he frames it. And by the way, this is what he did with Jasmine. And I talked about this last year when everyone was racing to excuse what he did. And I talked about this last year about like, because a lot of people online were saying were like, because, you know, everyone was so incensed by Janet that they wanted to just totally absolve Danny of what he did. And part of the absolution was, well, he apologized to Jasmine and Jasmine's forgiven him. And I talked about this last year. I was like, the flashback that we saw of his apology, I was like, yeah, he said the words, I'm sorry. But he did it in this way where he also said, that's not who I am. That's not my character. And for me, that's a bullshit apology. It's like, it is who you are, or else you would not have done it. Now, we don't need to vilify and demonize you for it. We do need to hold you responsible for what you've done. And part of that is you taking ownership of, holy shit, I get that I don't act like this sober and in my I get that's not who I want to be in my conscious life. But if I'm getting drunk, and if I'm grabbing people and saying demeaning things like, go get daddy a drink, and I'm making people uncomfortable, there's clearly buried stuff in me I need to go look at. And I'm going to take responsibility for my part in this by going and doing that inner work. And I feel like instead what Danny does is he finds a way to frame his uncomfortable, frightening, problematic behavior as, that's not who I am. Oh, I was just being playful. I got a little too competitive. And then what we see is Nia has to manage him within that framework. So it outwardly looks like she's challenging him, and she is to a degree, but you can feel it. There's only so far she can push. And Zach did something similar where, and I want to speak to this more in a moment, but he, I guess, promised Jasmine he was going to let Danny know in no uncertain terms, like, I'm not okay with what you actually did to Jasmine and Melissa. And then we get this very strange, awkward scene at Zach's housewarming where he pulls Danny aside. And it's the same thing as with Nia. You can see it. He kind of is like, you know, he's like, hey, you're my balls, bro. Like it's their private joke. And it's like, he's like kissing his ass and he talks around it. he talked around it so much that when I rewatched the scene, I was like, what? I had to like go back and find out what he was even supposed to say to Danny, because I was like, I have no fucking clue what Zach's even trying to communicate. He's like, Danny, your drinking isn't a problem for me, but some people are more sensitive and you've got this alpha thing going on. And if you could just be aware of it, like it's like word salad. And you can kind of see Danny getting quietly pissed, and you can feel Zach getting scared. And then they get to this bullshit resolution where they talk around something. They don't really get anywhere because they have to maintain this like overriding fiction that there's not something deeply problematic about Danny. And then we get it from the others too, where it's like, well, other people have problematic relationships with drinking, which is true. I mean, it's true, especially Zach. He really gets wild. But I will say, even with Zach, for me anyway, this is my perspective, and I think a lot of people feel this way. It doesn't feel it with anyone else. It doesn't feel as dangerous as it feels like with Danny. You can poke him a little too far. I'm not saying he would ever get violent. I'm just saying, to me, it feels like there's a violent edge to him when he drinks, a belligerence, a danger. It feels dangerous, and they're scared.
And the danger is,
I think if there's something that feels it could get out of control with him. Like if you push him too far, like I said, he's going to lose control. He's going to get violent. I mean, that's what was so interesting to me about that scene. At the end, Melissa says something like, what the fuck just happened? It's like dynamite went off. And part of me was like, oh, as part of this, Danny's disowned. If we're trusting the group as a vehicle for energy, are we getting Danny's disowned aggressive rage moving through the group? Because again, it's whack-a-mole. Like, he's not owning it. And then you got Melissa at the end being like, it just felt like dynamite just went off.
Yes, and he's not only passively aggressively instigating it, there's an aggression to it as well. So there's like you said, they are acting out the thing that they are accusing him of in some way. And then he points over there and is like, everybody else is doing, I'm not doing anything. Like, there's something unowned for sure.
And when you say they're acting out what they're accusing him of, you mean just in terms of like kind of louder, stronger energy
out of control. Because what I hear you speaking to in terms of a fear of what will happen with Danny if we go up against that edge is he will split and behave in a way that is shocking and surprising. We don't know the extent of, like, that's ultimately when I say there's something not being seen. He's saying, see my goodness. And they're saying, not until you see your darkness. Like, we can't kind of, we're trying to hold you in your fullness and you will not own it.
Exactly. And that's actually like, I feel the willingness of the group to hold him in his complexity. Because I think, to your point earlier, I think they all want to be held in their complexity. And I think that's kind of been the unintentional kind of beautiful, I don't know what the inversion of silver lining, but like the inversion of Vanderpump Rules, like the inverted humanity of this whole universe has been like these, I always called it twisted heart, like these kind of twisted souls that do have these hearts and, have the folly of their humanity and want to love and be loved, but then act out in destructive ways. But that's sort of like the gift of this universe. They are willing to hold space for their mutual complexity because they are, to their point, all deeply fucked up, as we all are. And to your point, like, or to sort of borrow off what you were saying earlier, Vanderpump Rules and Now the Valley, it's kind of just like a heightened version of it. You know what I mean? Of like the human folly, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I love what you just brought in, that this is kind of a group saying, Danny, we actually are willing to hold you in your complexity if you are willing to own the depth of your darkness. And I think what's interesting, what also came to me as you were talking, it's almost like Danny's not even content just to have the darkness be underground like a Schwartz. It's like Danny drinks, and I just suddenly got this image of him like with his chest puffed up, walking into a room. Again, kind of like what he did. I mean, he did it very quietly, in the scene I'm talking about where he's like, I'm not playing Janet's game, but it's almost kind of like there's an underground voice in Danny that's saying, try me. Try me. I dare
Give me an
you.
excuse. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like poke me. Like it's like there's something he does here. It's like he wants I don't know, I'm having trouble finding the words, but he wants people to like come up against me. Come up against me.
Yeah, if you follow that, Jamie, if you follow that, is it like to check you?
Yes.
You know?
Because he knows the game. He knows like you will ultimately be scared.
And what will that sort of outing fear do for you? What will that give you?
It's like it's like it's gonna put you, meaning the person opposite me is Danny, back in your place somehow. Like we're gonna keep this whole thing cinched up. Like I'm gonna like come at you a little bit, and you're gonna cower back in your place, and then we're gonna go back to the old fit. Like that's what I thought.
Nothing's resolved.
Exactly. Right. So this is what Zach was screaming, nothing's resolved. So I want to get to that in a moment because I was so drawn to Zach in the scene. But yeah, it's almost sort of like, someone who's stepping into the ring saying like, oh, you guys all have a problem with me? We'll step on up and deal with it. And then when no one does, it's like, yeah, I thought so. I'm going to go back to my throne over here. And it's so funny that you're asking about that, Piper, because at the end of the scene, when everything simmers down and they're arguing about something that's not the issue. And it just pans to Danny and he's just kind of sitting there with his arms crossed. He doesn't actually have a smile on his face, I don't think, but I just experience his energy of like, yep, I caused the whole fucking circus. And like, there was the smoke in the mirrors and they all fell for it. And now I'm settling back in here. Peace has been restored. But yeah, it's like he gets very angry about getting called out. And then it's like, okay, try me.
Yeah. And it maybe in this kind of group fantasy facilitation, I would want to see more of that played out. Exactly. Where does this take Danny? If he lets himself rage, if he lets himself move through how pissed he is for what they're showing him, will he drop into something? Or like, for instance, if people just stand there for it, if they let him have that without needing, because what happens, like you said, in this particular, why we can't track it all and how sort of disorienting it gets, the chaos is that's what they use. That's what they know. And so to interrupt the chaos, you kind of have to kind of let it play out sometimes, because the minute you keep interrupting it fuels something more in my estimation.
Yeah, and again, that's why I want to come back to Zach. But just to stay with this Danny thread for a second, it's like, yeah, because when I was embodying him a little bit and like stepping into the ring and saying, try me, I actually felt like the potential like power of this energy, like that he is this strong. To Zach's point, I mean, more and more I'm starting to think that Zach is actually very much like, I don't know if he realizes it's like intuitive. I think he really picks up on stuff and language comes through him without him even realizing it. Because even though I called it word salad, it's like that Danny is actually an alpha. And an alpha can be of deep service. Like those are the warriors in the collective, right? We need those alphas, and we need the heart-based aggression. We talked about this with a possible higher self of Jax, like way back when, like the soldiers, you know what I mean? And suddenly I'm seeing like Nia as the queen who he serves and protects, you know what I mean? But like, it's a strong, powerful energy. And, I didn't research Danny too much. Like what I know of him is that I believe his father was like the pastor. I don't know if it was like a mega church, but like a pastor of a church growing up. He was also a child star, I believe. Like he was like on Nickelodeon type shows. So, it's interesting. And that's how I've experienced Danny from like first season. It's just like this guy has a lot of intense energy and a big old Disney smile on his face, and it's so you can start to piece together the possibility of like, oh, someone who's an alpha, who's got a lot of fiery aggression, clearly deep sense of sex and sexuality, perhaps, you know, and it's interesting, you know, that he's on the shorter side. I don't say that as like to make fun of him. I say like as a visual metaphor that he's like this huge energy, perhaps like, comported into a smaller body, has to be the good religious boy, has to be the good Nickelodeon boy. You know, someone on my Instagram, I wish I remember who it was so I could shout them out properly. They made this amazing point that a lot of times Danny's darkest sides come out when he's in costume. So apparently the thing with Jasmine happened at a Halloween party. And then we saw him like dressed up in drag. So there's something about like the costume and the play. But, you know, the idea that this guy has never been allowed to let this energy run through him. And then to our points, perhaps gets made wrong for it, perhaps within the religious system, within like the entertainment industry system. So there's already a historical relationship to dark. Something in Danny gets labeled dark and bad. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I now feel angry, ashamed, upset about this. And now it's coming out in weird ways where it's getting labeled bad again. You know what I mean? So,
well, and I also have to disown it.
Well, exactly.
I have to separate from it, but that doesn't separate from me. It goes underground and I disown it. And so it comes out sideways, especially when I'm drinking and I'm not in control. And that is what people are trying to let him know, that he is impacting in a way that he will not recognize, because he's like, I don't have the power to do that.
And he won't recognize, and neither will Nia, will recognize his impact. That type of, when you are an alpha and you have this strong, assertive, aggressive energy, and that is driven underground, that is scary for people. Like that, like I feel like I'm naming it. Like that's the thing. Because the thing is, again, like with all of us, the source of his greatest power is also the source of his like greatest danger. It's like that energy, if unchecked, that energy, if untamed, that energy, if like unspoken for, it is scary, because then it could potentially become like a wild fire hose. That is what can become violent. So like to me, Jesse getting drunk and like licking someone's face, or even like like having an outburst towards Michelle, or even Zach getting drunk and yelling, to me, it doesn't have that same quality of like, there is a wild aggression in you that you do not take responsibility for. And it feels like it could literally be dangerous if it gets tripped in your,
and he doesn't understand that. Yeah.
And he doesn't understand how scary that is for people.
No. In fact, what he does is he points out when other people are having fun and says, I'm uncomfortable, when he's not uncomfortable.
Yeah. And that's the other thing too. I was so drawn to like this last episode where, Nia, we could do a whole episode on Nia and her relationship to this, but where she's like trying to manage him and tells him, don't move your hips, which was such a weird, like that whole episode. I was like, you guys are the ones who created this problem. Like there was no problem. No one would have given a shit if he had moved his hips. Like Nia brought that in for some reason. And then Danny believed it. And then what we saw was Danny rebelling against, again, this false framework they created that literally no one but them was telling this story. But what was so interesting to me was like this trigger for Danny of like people telling him what he can and cannot do. It's like, you
exactly
can't,
right back to the beginning.
You can't do that. You can't be that. Oh, I can't? I'll fucking show you. Mm-hmm. And I will say, like, even when I just like embody that, like that is a scary energy, actually. Again, when it's unconscious, I'll fucking show you. Like, it is scary.
Do you think it scares him?
Of course. Because he believes, so much of this is unconscious, but one, I think he believes his more assertive, aggressive energy is fundamentally bad because he was told it was bad. And then because of what we're talking about, where it gets pushed underground and it becomes distorted, I believe he does have deep hatred for someone like Janet. And as Danny, I'm sure he's sitting there on some level being like, oh my God, if I have this kind of deep hatred and anger and rage, this proves them right. There is something wrong with me. I am dangerous. You know, these are the layers that accumulate, you know? And that's why if this were a group facilitation where Jamie and Piper are working with the cast of the Valley, yes, obviously I agree with you. It would be so important to give Danny space for the depth of his rage and to let him go all the way back to where he was first told no, to where he was first given the message, you're wrong, you're bad, Dan, you can't, because he needs to know this energy for himself. He needs to get into conscious relationship with it so that he can wield it responsibly and lovingly. Because, and I do want to bring this in, Danny clearly has a loving side to him, you know, and so this energy actually wants to move through his heart where he can have both and be that like family man, provider, alpha who is of service and a protector and uses that energy to step in on behalf of people, not just bumping them and challenging them, you know, to fight.
I think we're touching on like, what is the relationship to anger with this group, with individual people within the group, and then collectively, but also the trust piece again. You know, can I trust someone that doesn't know their impact?
Yeah, and I think that's the distillation, because where all this all started was this idea of like, there's the unnameable. There's something they're pushing up against in Danny that no one, although I do want to say Michelle in this last episode kind of finally said it the most directly, where she was like, people are uncomfortable. I mean, it's so simple, but she did say it, you know, but I think collectively, historically, this group, like I said, there's that edge they pull back. There's a wire, like Danny's a ticking time bomb, and we're not tripping that wire. And it feels like contained in that. So it feels like there's just this nucleus in terms of the group field of there's just a wire we won't trip. We'll come up right against it. It's like the pliers. We'll put it right in the crosshair of the pliers. We will get as close as we can because we want to get there, but we won't cut the fucking wire. And it actually, I noticed it feels really good to say that. Like just in this field between you and me where we're exploring this energy, just even naming that, I suddenly feel this relief. And I suddenly feel like, oh, this isn't so scary after all.
Right.
Like, yeah, it deflated something.
Well, just because in that, what you just said, for me, what lands is my attraction or my relationship to chaos. If I have all of this history around it, I'm so much more comfortable in that and not in resolution, not in real contact. You know, like we're talking about a group of people that have a deep relationship to drama, being dramatic.
Okay. So you're interpreting what I said as a relief in terms of like, we're not going to trip the wire and therefore we're not going to get clarity. Whereas the way, which is interesting, because when you say that, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like I feel that. The way that I was meant it in the moment though was naming that clear fear felt like clarity to me. And once so once I had the energetic clarity, I was like, oh, this feels really good.
Yes.
So you're holding,
and you're not, I'm saying the group won't let you have that in the group. You know, It feels good to us because we arrived there, but within the group, that's not what's happening.
And it's almost like I'm getting information for the group that if they just fucking cut the cord, it would actually be so much simpler than they think. I don't even know what that means or looks like, but that's just, if I trust what's coming through right now, that's suddenly almost
it means like not being attached to the drama, like cut the cord.
And it's almost like the image I got. I mean, and I want to say like Danny's strong energy feels really real. Obviously, we've just spent time like honoring and acknowledging that. But it's like when I suddenly said like, oh, this could all be so much simpler than they think, I got this image of Danny where his like chest is puffed up and, he's like, parading around the boxing ring. And it was suddenly like that just fell away like a big costume. And I saw this little scared mouse like hiding underneath it, which of course makes sense. Like that is how Danny feels deep down, right? There's like this terrified, young, lost, confused part of him, this little boy. And it's almost like the second the group just cuts the cord, it's like the big bad wolf becomes the frightened. And actually suddenly I'm feeling like, just a lot of like sadness for him.
Yeah. Can't you see this in a group setting where it's pure energetics, like a circle holding space for him to run, to just move all of this, like you said, the big bad wolf, but not react to it, not respond to it, hold space for it. And then ultimately what happens in group settings often is the energy gets to be moved without all the response that triggers something old. This is taboo. This is bad. It's just neutral. It's holding space. And then, I can have this energy and it winds down. And then I think what can open there oftentimes is, wait, I'm running. What am I running from? I'm scared. So there's something about this reactivity, this attachment to having, my voice needs to be out there. I need to be seen, instead of, can I hold space for what's actually happening? Which again, that brings me back to, just the idea that they are on a show to be seen, to create narratives, whether it's intentional or unintentional. And I think there's something to that unspoken layer, that they are playing to something also.
Well, and, to the point I was just making, Danny's been watched his whole life, you know what I mean? By the congregation, by TV viewing audiences. And so it's interesting, the relationship to being watched.
Yeah, I'm so interested in what Danny also saw, not just what he learned about his own, but how rage was shared or not in his sort of upbringing, like the relationship to his version of being, if it was ever used against him, if, he was bullied. I don't know. There's just something about how disowned this is.
Yeah.
It doesn't just feel like it was taboo for him. I think there's that, like when you talked about the mouse, like the deeper fear of rage itself.
Yeah, when you just said that, I just felt so strong. I just heard like this guy has seen some things. Like he has seen some things. And that like tight smile he's got on his face. Oof. It is like him. I suddenly feel like, well, it's interesting because their home life embodies this. But I'm just doing everything I can to hold this all together. Like, and so that feeling of their household, like the chaos, the chaos of 4 under 4, like this house pressure bursting at the seams with these kids driving to and fro to voiceover jobs and filming the show and like the constant chaos, the voice that says, I'm just holding this all together. That to me feels like such a deep energetic pattern for Danny of like, I have seen some fucking things and I'm being watched and I got a smile on my face. And it's almost like what starts to come to me is the possibility of like, in terms of relationship to rage, if he is not only like rage being modeled in a certain way outside of him, but then if he's having like, let's say a rightful reaction to that as like a kid or growing up and having his own rage or his own response. And it's like, Danny, you don't behave like that, and it's like, that could be another layer right there. So
which is in this cast too, right?
So which again comes back to the fear of like, because I'm just hearing ticking time bomb. There's that imagery again, ticking time bomb. Like this guy is a ticking time bomb. And I think people are picking up on that in a way that Zach isn't a ticking time bomb, in the way that Brittany isn't a ticking time bomb, in the way that Jesse isn't a ticking time. I mean, they have got their own shit, but it's a false equivalency.
Well, it's interesting too to think about those people that you've named and what were their ticking time bombs. Jax Taylor, like
right.
There are Lala, in her world, it's like they've been around a bunch of, lit dynamite, and they've had an experience, and they are clocking something. They were Nia. They were, maybe in some version, trying to make something work, even though there was something dangerous underneath. They were not seeing that. And I think that's what they keep calling out with the whole Nia and Danny thing. Every time they shut it down, they had to do something around those things at another time. And it's almost like, not on my watch anymore. It's that it just scratches that place that they probably were their own version of doing that. Like this is like I said, the third season, like they've seen enough of something where they're like, now I'm going to do it differently, but not really.
Well, it's so interesting. I want to get to Jasmine and Zach, but I just read this thing today online where Nia was talking about being in pageants, and I guess she was in the pageant that was owned by Trump. And she was talking on a podcast about how there was a point where Trump brought in all these like creepy, sketchy older men to leer at the pageant contestants. And then they had to take pictures with them. And that one of the men, like they would just freely get handsy with the young women. And that Nia, because I guess she's trained in self-defense, actually used her self-defense to like remove the guy's hand and like basically let him know, like, no, sir, you're not touching me like this. And so it's just so interesting to take her in as someone who does have this aspect of her that's so strong and assertive and boundaried. And the way that energy is now getting so funneled into managing a ticking time bomb in her house. I mean, I kind of have a feeling Nia is actually scared of her own power. Like really, because I mean, she already embodies it, albeit in that kind of pageanty way where there's a smile on her face. She's very soft spoken, but like, what would it mean for Nia to really just be unapologetically in her power, in her fire? But it's interesting. I think, looking at life through her lens, it just seems like there's something in her that's invested in funneling that strength, energy, and life force into managing the ticking time bomb that lives in her own home.
Well, that's what I'm saying. She managed that situation with her, self-defense, but did she bring it to the system? Did she say this is a problem? No, she took care of something on her own. And I think when I hear that from you, what I'm sensing, if I'm her, is, that's how you do it. You take care of just the personal in between here. You don't address the big picture. That's you're stepping out when you do that. So there's almost like a what do I want to call, like an arrogance in a way that, like, if I have the power to do that, everybody else should have the power to do that. And then nothing would happen, and I think she's missing a big piece of this, which is a part of the system where that wasn't okay for Jasmine.
Right. Yeah. And also this goes back to just that notion I brought in up top of like Nia and others will push back within the established framework, but we're not going to push on the framework.
That's it. Yes.
So yeah, this sort of segues nicely into Jasmine, and maybe we've already spoken to it, but what was so interesting to me when I was kind of watching select clips was, as I said before, realizing that I actually don't even know exactly where Jasmine stands in all of this. Again, I think in part probably because she hasn't felt permission to get clear. But it's so interesting because, like, even last season, if you think about it, like, I didn't really rewatch any of last season, but I'm remembering bits and pieces of, like, there's this scene on the beach where Jasmine's like yelling at Janet and like calling her a Karen. But then I'm also thinking about the reunion where Jasmine very clearly said, like, no, Janet was speaking up for me. And I appreciate that she was, like, in some ways, like an advocate for me. But then coming into this season, it's like she's saying she's mourning the death of her friendship with Janet. And, Janet was sitting there apologizing for sort of co-opting her story. And yeah, Jasmine seemed very upset about that, and it had severed their friendship. But then, like, going back to this fight, well, even before this, so like talking about that scene between Zach and Danny at the housewarming, that all comes up because Jasmine has this conversation with Zach when they're out in Silver Lake, where she says to him, basically she goes back to the reunion of last year where Andy Cohen asked, like, who here feels that Janet was being reckless by using the term sexual assault? And Zach raised his hand. And Jasmine literally says to him in this conversation, like, basically, I have feelings about the fact that you raised your hand and you weren't sort of being a good friend to me in that way. And then she literally says, although truth be told, I didn't feel like Janet's language was an accurate representation of how I felt. And then Zach looks at her, he's like, well, that's what I was saying. And then Jasmine sort of looks back and is like, but I forget her exact language, but it's basically saying, but like you're minimizing, kind of like you're not recognizing that he did something to me. And Zach says to her, like, no, he did do so. I feel he did something to you. And I also feel that Janet did something to you. And Jasmine's basically saying, I wish you hadn't raised your hand to remain neutral so that I knew you had my back and you were on my side. And so Zach is saying, no, I unequivocally feel what he did to you is wrong. And Jasmine says to him, well, do you tell him that? And I want you to tell him that, which is just, even that's interesting because this is bringing in the notion of loyalty. I don't know if this is blind loyalty because what Danny did do is wrong, but it's this notion of loyalty, having my back and speaking up on my behalf, which is really interesting. And so then that's when Zach says, okay, I will do it. I'll go in and tell him unequivocally, like, what he did was wrong. And then that's what leads to that weird conversation where he doesn't do that in his bedroom in his apartment and instead has this weird word salad conversation. But then that brings us to the scene in question, the night of Schwartz's birthday party, where so Zach is all over the place because initially he defends liking the social media content, saying, we've all done this. And Jasmine gets pissed at him, being like, why are you defending him? At which point Zach then flips over to, I'm not. And everyone's scared to tell Danny the truth. Again, we'll get to Zach, but it's just another instance of like, this is all over the place. But coming back to Jasmine, I guess this is my roundabout way of just saying I'm often curious. I'm curious about where she actually stands, what's going on with her, because in that scene she was again appreciative of she was appreciative of Janet saying something, anything, again, even though these social media posts really don't directly tie in to the main issue, which is what Danny did. But I guess Jasmine's just so happy that anyone's pushing back against Danny that she's in that moment more on Janet's side with the social media argument. But this is just my way of saying, like, or bringing in the question of like, where is Jasmine in all of this? And what is the voice that wants to come through? And also this notion of her, like, I'm so curious about what it would mean for her to use her voice all the way and what she would have to say. And then in the place where that's perhaps not happening, what she wants from her friends, especially when she seems like she's been back and forth with Janet, which, you know, admittedly, she has the right to be confused because I do think Janet did something where she was kind of on the right side of history, but in a way that was weaponized, and how much of this was actually about Jasmine and how much of this was about Janet. So I'm saying a lot all at once, but I'm curious about Jasmine's spoke in the wheel And I'm just curious, if anything comes to you or where you're at with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where we would go, in a group, giving space for Jasmine and to, like you said, answer that very clear-cut question, but to also help her experience what it feels like when she's registering support versus what it feels like when something is either performative or potentially missing the support that she actually could use. Because there's something about this back and forth. And I'm aware that what Janet brought in as support was also problematic for the reasons you just said, but also for the things that she was defining in her words, sexual assault, what happened. And maybe Jasmine wouldn't say it like that. Maybe she would say it in another way. But what does that term mean to Jasmine? What does it mean to Janet? What has their experience been around that? What does it mean? Like, clearly, that is the concern that Danny had. He goes to therapy after that gets used, or that's what he references as traumatic for him, versus like having someone say what his actions and behavior felt like to them. Like, why didn't that crack something, or why was that not referenced? I started seeking support to help me understand better my behavior towards women when I'm drinking. So yeah, I think giving space for Jasmine and also like asking something around, because oftentimes I think from a systemic lens, it's like, I shouldn't have to do this. Like somebody else needs to speak out against this. It's not my job to do. I already know what it felt like, So is it asking too much to even ask her to say what that experience was in a group setting where she's surrounded by a cast that is part of something? Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I know this goes without saying, but I have to say it is wild that Danny is so much more concerned with the experience of being labeled a sexual assaulter as opposed to what he actually did and the impact it had on Jasmine. I also want to say, I also just got this hit that if there were a space that we could create in our fantasy group league, for Jasmine to let Danny know the impact uncensored, I feel like it would have like a devastating impact on him, like in a good way. Like, I feel like for him to take, like, that's the thing. Cause I was saying that before, like Nia and Danny don't want to take in his impact. There's something about Danny taking in his impact that just feels so crucial to like his process of like breaking down the steel armor.
And here comes my protection for Jasmine, like I want to say, and you are not responsible for cracking that code over there. Like, that isn't for Danny. This would be for you.
Exactly. Because that's what I was going to say. It's not about, for me, my desire for her to have space, it's not about the group and it's not about Danny. It's about Jasmine having space for her voice. And I also really heard you, to your point, if she is someone, going back to what I was saying earlier, who's maybe more quieter, and maybe she has a way of processing that's different and she doesn't want to bring it out in that way. She doesn't have to. But there is something that still needs to happen within the group, I think, for her.
But she gets to decide what that is.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. she gets, and that's, again, it's sort of like this particular group doesn't leave her options, right? Because it's sort of like, certainly, like I was saying before, she's not going to have like time and space to go off and be on her own and develop a nuanced response and then bring it in the way that's right for her. Like, not with these Neanderthals. Like, it's sort of like either you bring it in some reckless Vanderpump Rules universe way, or you shut it down. Like, these are the options. It's like you're either the anvil or you're dropping the anvil on your own voice, which again, it's going to bring us to Zach and what came out of him and the way that it came out. But I think, it's just, as you were talking, and maybe this is stating the obvious, it's almost like I felt this potential like arc where it's like something happened before the show started. Jasmine puts it away because it's like there's not room or space for this. Then it's like season 1 happens, and then in between season 1 and 2, because I believe this, there's something in Janet that wants something exposed, something real about Danny and real about Nia. She's not making it up, but she wants it out there and she wants it exposed. She suddenly goes back around to this, whatever you want to call it, this secret, this like experience in the back pocket, and starts using it. Although, actually, I do want to say Jasmine did talk to Danny about it on camera, so I can't completely blame Janet for that. Well, but so maybe what this actually speaks to is Jasmine's process of sitting with something and metabolizing something and trying to find her way with it that perhaps feels safe within this framework. And then, yes, it still did get co-opted by Janet, as the seasons go on.
This piece about Janet co-opting something, like being in my seat with people, it's not our job to say what happened for someone else. And I think part of maybe what is so slippery here is there was an experience that was had by 2 people, and then there's an activation or a sort of a projection that comes in based on I just keep feeling this potentiality where Janet has her own experience that she is overlaying and naming something that maybe Jasmine would call differently or call out differently. And something collapses right there because Janet is refusing to apologize for what she's calling out. And it didn't happen to her, like she's talking about it as if it happened to her, which is very interesting to me. And the question I think that's more important is the way that the experiencer experienced it.
I guess what I'm sort of intrigued by in terms of Jasmine claiming her experience for herself is the fact that, because yes, to both of our points, she is under no obligation to speak up or to share her story or to do this or to do that. But then what's interesting, though, is the apparent desire for others to speak up for her. That she did ask Zach, go talk to Danny and tell him you feel it was wrong. And then there are times where she seems to appreciate Janet speaking for her. So that's where I get curious for Jasmine about, like, again, what do you actually want here? Because I would think if you're wanting people to speak up for you, and again, this is where we come into like sides, loyalty, like it does seem like there's something she actually wants seen and heard. And she wants it seen and heard by the group. She wants to know that it matters. And look, I mean, obviously there is some sort of relationship Jasmine, I feel, has to like this notion of being overlooked. We've watched her this season saying, I've got something to say and no one's listening. I tried to bring my triggers and no one acknowledged it. And absolutely, there is a systemic conversation to have here about her place on the cast as a gay Black woman. And I'm also curious for her in terms of personal history, how this would play out. Like if she has a personal history with this notion of being overlooked, wanting people to see her, to hear her, to speak up for her. And I also I heard you bring in something earlier that was really interesting to me about the notion of like the responsibility of the collective to speak up for the people who have gone through things, like that it's not actually their job. So all of that just feels here. I don't know if I'm saying anything about it other than just I noticed there's something in Jasmine that does want something to be seen and heard. And it just makes me curious about where she is in all of this. And even like within that, what is like, was it fair of her to, I mean, quote unquote fair, or whatever that means, you know, the way that she was upset that Zach raised his hand, you know, at that reunion when he's sitting there saying, look, what I hear him saying is like, I'm looking at this from a nuanced perspective of really sort of holding space for everyone, you know, but then at the same time, he does feel scared of Danny. So it's just like, I don't know. There's just a lot here.
Agreed. I think we're kind of in some way tying I don't know, like a thread through the whole piece here where we can't speak for Jasmine either, you know, and the question, you know, would be, does she want to have a voice in this particular dynamic? And if she does, what would she need to be able to have it? And can we as a collective hold space for that?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways this is stating the obvious, but I'm really feeling it right now in just such a distilled way. Like the vibe I get off Jasmine is just this sense of like, I want to know my voice matters.
Yeah. Yeah. And it certainly does.
Yeah, I want to know I belong. I want to know my voice matters. I want to know you care.
I want to know what I'm doing here in this, you know.
Because like with everyone else, I feel, yeah, such a capacity in her to hold the complexity of all this. And I feel like, again, I feel like if Danny and Nia were just able to truly take in the truth of her experience, I think she would walk this journey with them.
That's like, I just want to pause there. That is so true. Like the capacity is there because she lives it. And the lack of capacity on the other side is because I don't want to feel what you've experienced. I haven't let myself like feel what you have felt, which has given you that capacity, you know? So this is kind of in my mind, what happens in dynamics that don't resolve something.
Which does bring us to Zach. But before we go to Zach, is there anything else you can say about this notion of like the role of the collective to speak up? I don't know. I was just so drawn to that when you said it.
It's kind of like to speak to the way it feels, you know, to not look away, to hold space and to say, I'm standing, you know, like if I'm in a group, right, and I'm a participant and someone is saying something, whether I like get it all the way or not, it's kind of to stand up and say, yes, speak, have this all the way, go through it, let yourself arrive somewhere that feels good for you. Like in my collective voice, that's what I want to stand for, is for the voices that don't often find their way into a room because the more experienced, the more easily, like you said, the anvil, you know, the more practiced, the more listened to voices just automatically come in and fill up the space.
Don't I know it?
Yes,
you're giving me flashbacks. Yeah,
you do know this. You do know this. And what would it have been like for you if a bunch of people stood up and said, hang on a second, something else wants to be known and heard here. Let's make space for that.
And just to clarify context, I mean, Piper and I are referring to, I've talked about how we met, right? So I went through a 4-year training program and this group facilitation work started by Anne Bradney, who's been on the podcast, and Piper was our class assistant. So that's where we first met. It was a 4-year training program. So anyways, I was that person. I mean, I was someone who had deep fear and difficulty speaking up in groups. And yes, there were definitely personality, which is so funny. It's like, oh, how things change. It's like, here I am, like I'm literally in front of a microphone with a podcast, like speaking out to thousands of people. But no, there were voices that were much louder and stronger and quicker to speak. And so, yes, Jasmine, I'm with you. I know that experience. I know that experience very well. Of it is very easy for others to speak up in a big, bold way. And when you are not inclined that way, it can feel very hard. And, part of the beauty of that program and Anne's work is she does, very consciously create that space for all the voices. And so that's why that experience, well, it's one of the many reasons that experience was so meaningful for me. But I think just the last thing before going to Zach, in terms of the responsibility of the group, it's just so interesting. Like, not only were they turning it away, and I still think they are, from like the depth of what Danny did, but like I remember even at the reunion last year, I forget who brought it up, but someone brought up that Brittany had mentioned that Danny was like making her uncomfortable at a party or something. This was at the reunion. And again, it sort of just gets like brushed aside. And so it's like, again, it's just like that to me is where I start to feel this. It's just that sort of that metaphor of like what the collective overlooks, that like there's a problem here. Like Danny is getting drunk and he's making women uncomfortable. And the way the cast doesn't want to fully take that in. And again, going back to your original point that we're not like totally like dropping into, but again, there is this notion of like, this is a TV show, I mean, never even mind the implications on a personal level of like, oh, this is a charged topic. It's heavy. It's uncomfortable. How do we hold the complexity of this, especially with someone as charged and a ticking time bomb like Danny? And then we're on a TV show that we all want to work. And we have our alliances. And are we going to torpedo this? And what happens if this comes out all the way? It's like a chokehold. I'm feeling suffocation around my throat all of a sudden. Like we can only go so far, just like with Danny himself. Like we can only go, so we got to like talk around this. And then I know she's not the main topic, but in terms of like blind loyalty, as we all know, Kristen is sort of like the living embodiment of blind loyalty. And it's almost sort of like, I just suddenly felt this hit for her of like, what would Kristen have to look at inside herself if the blind loyalty softened? Like if this conviction that she has clung to in friendship after friendship after friendship, because that's its own sort of chokehold. And if she were to relax that grip and be able to let herself see some things.
Well, I actually sense that it has something to feel some things, like she feels pretty deeply when she lets herself go there. And I think there's something about a mirror with Danny, she's got her own version of being out of control. And I think there's something about
and misunderstood.
And exactly. And intentionality. And there's this other thing that we haven't talked about too much, which is their relationship to alcohol.
Yeah.
I think this is another sort of, layer that's in here. They all have their own relationship to justifying how much they drink, what happens when they drink, what's okay and what's not okay. They're young, but there's certain behaviors that come out when they drink.
They're also not that young.
That's true. To me, I think when I say that, I mean where they're arrested in their
Well, and we've
development.
watched them since their 20s. I know I make this mistake all the time. It's like I still think of Amanda Petula as like in her early 20s from Summer. It's like I don't know, I think sometimes I forget, or I've been watching I binge watch Southern Hospitality, and I kept having to remember season 4. It's like, oh, they're 5 years older. Like they're not 25 anymore, they're 30. You know what I mean? But it's like sometimes I forget.
Well, you forget because there hasn't actually been a real change. Even though they're having children, even though, like, one of the things that I was thinking about my experience of witnessing Danny and Nia have these very sort of chaotic conversations while she's nursing her baby and feeling her anxiety and tension and, like you said, management of everything that's happening while she's also providing a nervous system for a child, an infant child. And I'm like, ugh, this is really hard to watch.
Yeah. We could go down a whole other road, but I agree with you. And yes, there is a lot there for sure. I think that Nia is someone much like Brittany. I think, and again, much like the cast, I think that there's a deep unconscious investment in chaos and having to manage things and having to do 5,000 things at once. And, but anyways, we'll leave that for a second. Well,
but I think, there is something actually that feels good about naming it, kind of in the same way you were saying the other thing, like, oh, something settles here. It's like, that was the other piece I wanted to say that might be playing out in that scene, is that everybody is in some sort of transition relationally in some way. We've got Kristen and Luke going through their things. We've got, clearly Nia and Danny are trying to work something out. The other two, we've got Jasmine and they're getting ready to get married. We've got Jesse and Michelle sort of like trying to work something out in the behind the scenes, but all of that is sort of in the field itself. All of these changes in relationships to their own bodies, to their own partners, to their life is sort of in the mix here. So I don't know. I just feel like maybe that speaks to the intensity. And then having Lala, of all people, kind of, she wasn't a part of any of that, but she's calling it in, like, I got to be a part of something. I'm not drinking anymore. Like, somehow there's some relevance that needs to be had. And then watching Schwartz just kind of go from person to person, as like a human teddy bear support thing. I don't know. It was just so fascinating to just kind of feel each of them in their own sort of headspace and what was actually feeding the intensity aside from the fatigue of travel and drinking and all that.
Well, so yeah. I mean, I definitely want to touch on Zach in all of this because it's so interesting because, like I already said, Zach, something starts to unfold. And then Zach pipes in, even though this really has nothing to do with him. And as I said before, he's kind of all over the place where initially, because they're arguing about liking posts, and Zach comes in with, we've all done it. And then Jasmine gets pissed because she's basically like, essentially, you're taking a side. And what's interesting is Zach gets angry in response towards Jasmine and he's yelling. But then he starts, I feel like, essentially naming a lot of the underground things that don't want to be named. So he literally says, nobody wants to be honest because everybody is so fucking scared. And I think there's truth to that. And when I was first watching it, because I was going back to like the scene in his bedroom with Danny where he talked around something. And then the fact that, later we find out he was really sort of ruminating over the fact that Danny had lied to him, about not drinking at his party, and that bothered him. And so when I heard him screaming about this, I was like, oh, he's sort of yelling at himself. He's speaking to his own fear, because then later on, he says, like, basically everyone's scared to be totally honest with Danny. you know? And so initially when I first watched it, I was like, oh, he's really like speaking to his own fear. But then in rewatching it, I was like, no, he's really naming what feels like, again, this organizing principle of this group of like, again, something happened at the start of production, I guess, of this very show that's been sort of sitting in the shadows of it. And he's speaking to that fear of going too far with Danny. And so, but what was interesting to me about it, and so essentially he's like agreeing with Jasmine in a way, and he's speaking to these core truths and it's coming through him. But what's fascinating to me is that he's doing it in this way that continues to shut the conversation down, because he's literally screaming. He's cutting people off when they try to like interject. And at one point, he literally just goes around and points fingers at different people and says, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. So it's like he drops these truth bombs about what's going on with Danny, but he does it in this way where he's dropping anvils, not letting anyone else speak, contributing to the chaos. And it's almost like, I almost kind of felt like if Zach, if I'm right, like kind of like a Kyle Cook on Summer House, or sometimes Candy on Atlanta, if he's sort of like this deeper channel for group energy and disowned truth that wants to come to the surface, it's almost like in this moment, he's embodying the ambivalence, where it's like he's naming the truth that wants to come out, but then at the same time, he is crushing the truth as it comes out. He's like bringing it forward, but then he's just like making sure like no one gets a say. And I just found that fascinating. And then he ends up yelling, and like going back to what you said, he says, because nothing ever gets resolved because no one ever listens to anybody. And this group is fucking fucked because nobody actually gives any resolution. But again, he's screaming about this in a way where he's not actually listening to anyone. And so it's just like that moment to me felt like the split, the push pull. And I really am experiencing it as like much in the same way that like I experience people coming up close to something and Danny and backing out. It's like a split cell. Like there's literally like a Sharpie black defined line with two different sides. I'm having trouble finding the language, but it's like one side is this truth that wants to emerge and the other side is the fucking anvil pushing it down. It's like this split between what wants to move and we won't let it move. It wants to move and we won't let it move. It wants to move and we won't let it move. And, you know, you mentioned the alcohol. It's almost like Zach had to be drunk to reach this place of just, it's almost like this is what wanted to come through in that scene in the bedroom that couldn't quite come through. Or if I think about how he was in the last reunion, where he kind of kept making asides quietly, and he kind of kept mumbling things to himself in kind of this caustic way. And it's almost like, no, like this is what's wanted to come through in those moments.
Exactly.
And you feel the frustration and you also feel the love and the heart, but just all of it. And he's drunk, so it's coming through, but then he's scared to let it stand. And so he crushes it.
I agree. And I think you're speaking to what happens when there's something unresolved inside and it gets activated in a moment, and then what's coming through is not necessarily appropriate for the moment. It's got all this fuel from unresolved experiences that happened prior. And then it gets really confusing because everybody's like, with the energy, whoa, why is this so? That's what they respond to. It's not actually, you know, like it when you were talking about this push-pull place, you know, the Sharpie line, I was experiencing that as control. You're not letting anything move.
Which is like Danny in a nutshell.
Exactly.
And as you were talking, it's like I just suddenly got this sense, again, speaking to the group field, it's like it's this cast of characters. They're all so charged. Like this is an energized group. They have feelings and emotions and passion and energy. And it's almost like what we're watching is like, yeah, this is what happens when there is this strong, energized group that is not letting something move. that's trying to manage its own wildness, its own deeper truth. I mean, Jesse always feels that way to me. Like, I mean, even this last episode where he was like admitted that basically he was pissed at Brittany because of something she said to Lacey like a year ago. And so because of that, he got on board this train that like Brittany was behind taking down Danny. And he was like Jesse just gets so blinded by his own short-term anger. And then he just like hops on a train with it and like lets it run wherever it's going to go. But yeah, I mean, it's just these charged people. And they're looking for, it's like when they can't fire the cannon at the actual target, it's like, where does that cannonball go? And then they're just having these wild, chaotic arguments where they're literally flipping sides within the course of one conversation.
Well, it's hot potato. Yeah.
But it is interesting to me as like we're sitting here. It's like, to me, I mean, obviously this is a very complex issue and there's so many different layers we could like unpack. But like in terms of like this particular conversation and that particular argument in that hotel room, it really does feel like so much of this just comes down to Danny. Like, you did something and you do something when you're drunk that is inappropriate, and it is scary and it is upsetting, and it's an issue and it's a problem. And no one really wants to fully name it and acknowledge it. And the one person who was willing to was a bit of a difficult messenger because it wasn't fully in service of the highest good.
Yeah, I would ask Janet what her intention is. You know, like when you bring in this voice in the way that you do, are you trying to take someone down, or are you, you know, calling in their highest self? Like, what's your intention? That would be a question that I have for her, because it's very confusing. There's something that, you know, still feels really unnamed about her intention with this, and I don't know what it has to do with really. But
well, and then there's this whole other wrinkle where in this last episode she alluded to having experience with sexual assault herself of some kind. I don't know if you saw this last week's episode.
I didn't see the whole thing, but are you saying she was bringing that into like a girls' talk?
She got really upset at the beginning of the episode and kind of walked away from the scene and calls Jason. So she, I think, was trying to get off camera. Oh. The cameras followed her, and on the phone call with Jason, she's like, this is bringing things up that I don't want to talk about or I can't talk about. And then a producer starts talking to her. And she says to the producer, like, there are things I haven't been saying and I've been wrestling with whether to. And then, you know, I mean, I really want to say, she then says, can we talk off camera? And it cuts and we don't get any more of it. So, you know, the implication was pretty clear that she has history with sexual assault.
But not within this group. Like, it's
not within this group. But, okay. And she did say, I believe in that section, she was like, I can't apologize to him because of my experience, essentially. So this definitely speaks to what you were bringing in earlier.
She clearly gets overwhelmed, you know, like there's something there, something very personally activating that feels deep. And it feels like she's trying to work out something through this experience with Danny. That's just the way my hit is, a feel there.
Yeah, I suddenly feel bad for her because it's like, and I actually feel this notion again of feeling misunderstood.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I'm feeling that connection between them in a way, like both feeling misunderstood.
Yes, which is interesting.
It is interesting because obviously Janet does play such a big part in this particular constellation in terms of the role she played this last year. But then her way of dealing with it this year is to stay quieter on the sidelines. But she's like a held back energy. So, you know, again, talk about complexity. Janet feels so complex because in a way she kind of embodies everything we're talking about, right? It's like, there's personal history in terms of like what she's bringing in terms of like her own relationship to trauma and sexual assault and whatever is unresolved there for her. There does feel like, obviously this is connected, some desire to expose Danny, using someone else's story to do that. And then within all of this, I think, as we all know, Janet's someone who many of us experience as playing the game of the show. Mm-hmm. So it's a really, talk about nuanced. It feels like an intersection point of a lot going on at once. And unfortunately, the framework of The Valley, in terms of the way it tells its stories, I don't know is the best vehicle for this level of complexity. But even that's sort of interesting as a metaphor. If we think about Danny as this huge energy comported into a little body, it's like The Valley as a show almost energetically kind of represents like this, I almost want to say, richness of complexity. That's again, like as Zach like bursts forth with this energy of like, let's tell the fucking truth. It's almost like The Valley is this charged richness of complexity and feeling, heart, nuance that is being packaged into this tiny little reductive Bravo show. These storylines, as we call them,
Yeah, the complexity of truth, the complexity of reality, the complexity of experience.
Oh, that's the thing. I really, I would love to I wish we could have just 5 days just to support everyone, just to be in the truth of how they feel.
To learn something about their perception, what they base it on, how they use it, and what it creates. They're all, like you said, quite charged, quite creative, quite, they're not young, as you pointed out. They're young in some ways, but like there's
youthful.
There's some growth. Yeah, they're youthful. I like that. They're youthful and they're aging. They're now responsible for other people's development, and they have some growth that could be had as they're influencing other young beings.
And it feels like, as I sit with it, I just feeling how it feels like every single one of them just wants to be seen and heard.
Well, they're on a TV show. Yes, for sure. Yes.
But like, again, from that context of feeling misunderstood, like for the truth of how they experience themselves, but then also the invitation for each of them to know their impact on others,
Intention and impact.
But I think the last thing I'll say, I've said it already, but I just to put a button on it because it feels so strong to me. I don't know. I just keep being drawn back to Zach as this vessel for like the deeper energy that wanted to come through, and the way that it sort of overtook him, and my experience of him as kind of like this conduit or channel for the group energy. And because again, when I go back to what he said to Jasmine at that bar, where he was like, I see what Danny did to you, and I also see what Janet did to you. And because part of what he's screaming in that scene is like, I'm put in the middle. And I almost think, like, in terms of what we were talking about, in terms of this group being willing to hold space for each other's complexity, it's almost like I really kind of see him maybe as the center of that wheel of like kind of the guy who's, because people see him a bit as the Greek chorus, even though I've never really experienced him as like particularly pragmatic, because he does tend to have strong points of view and he gets carried away. But like there is a way that he's witnessing everything. And I think there's a way he clocks things. And I think there's a way in which he really is willing to see the complexity of everyone. And I think that his deepest desire is for there to be space for all the shades of the truth. And it just really felt to me like in that moment, he was feeling the weight of that suffocation. And it came out in this wild way. And I guess it's just me speaking to my possible experience of him as, someone who's like tapped into deeper energy, someone who's got a connection to like intuition, what's going on in the deeper layers, and his desire to like kind of let that run through him. Because you'll notice, by the way, like even though they're still dancing around a lot, there was kind of some little breakthroughs on the other side of his eruption, like in terms of, that's when Michelle finally made her direct comment to Nia of like, Danny makes people uncomfortable and no one wants to say it. Actually, it's when Janet came through with her deeper truth. I mean, off camera or not, about her own experience with trauma. Zach did end up bringing more of his truth to Danny, and Danny seemed to hear him more than usual at that poolside conversation. Even like Michelle kind of articulating things to Jesse about what's true. I don't know. You kind of saw, it felt to me, again, it's fractured because they're still dancing around things, but even that movement of energy, you can kind of track that things are a bit more settled on the other side. Of course, it's going to ramp up again because they're still circling around things, but it's interesting just to track that a bit.
Yeah, I think for Zach, maybe there's a place in him that will mature in terms of being able to let his voice come through, but then to sit back and let the other voices come in without controlling. Like I said, that kind of that point where you said the push pull, I go back to that. It's like he's holding that as if something's going to fall apart if he doesn't, and right. He's the center, like you said, but he steps into that. Nobody's asking him for that.
No, well, that's what I'm saying. It's almost like he can only muster up. I mean, this is all unconscious, of course, but like the courage to do it in this wild way where it's like he basically literally loses control. That's what allows it to come out. But then that's what I'm saying. It's like he's vocalizing the truth, but then he's also embodying the fear because he's bringing it out, but then he's shutting it down just as quickly.
Yeah.
But even in that, he's like embodying something. He's embodying the split in the group between the energy that wants to move and the anvil that cuts it off.
And an urgency for something to resolve it itself. It's like the trust that's lacking there is that it will find its way. It's like, I have to orchestrate that. And that is not going to do it. You know, like to me, that's where he gets a little stuck.
Well, and that's the lack of trust in space.
Yes.
You know, like that's why I was talking about this chokehold, the suffocation. And then that's where blind loyalty comes in. It's like we have to cling to these convictions. And, you know, something about the blind loyalty, it's almost like because this space is so untrustworthy, we need allies. We need fucking allies because this feels like a fucking war zone. And I need to know someone has my back because no one else does. You know, so it's like, it's almost like, I don't know what the metaphor is, but it's like if two people have to agree, like you're playing tug of war and there's an agreement that we both have to let it drop, but you have to trust the other person's going to let it drop. Mm-hmm. And like no one's willing to be the one to fall over, you know, or like the scorpion and the frog. You got to fucking trust the scorpion's going to like honor their end of the deal, you know? And it's like, they're all the scorpion and they're all the frog, you know, and no one wants to take the chance of like having the scorpion right on their back and sting them.
Right. So, because that stinger is unpredictable to even the scorpion themselves. Mm-hmm. That's what they don't trust, you know?
All right. Well, this is good. This is a lot. I'm rooting for them. I'm rooting for them to let that energy move, you know, and maybe ideal scenario during the hiatus, it would be nice if maybe Danny could do a little bit deeper inventory inside of himself and maybe make contact with those parts of himself that feel so dangerous to other people and himself. All right, Piper, thank you as always. So great to have you here. And you guys, as always, you can follow me on Instagram, Jamie Stein, JAMIESTEIN. And you can head over to my website, hollywoodreadings.com, if you're curious about my work. And that's it for today. All right, you guys, see you on the flip side. Bye.